The shooting range. In this episode, pages of history, American tanks in Normandy, tactics and strategy, playing HE Wielders, and metal beasts, top Japanese Interceptor. In the last few episodes, the Metal Beasts section was dedicated to the fresh vehicles brought to you by the latest update. But we also love to dust off an oldie from time to time. So today's oldie is the top Japanese piston-engined Interceptor aircraft with a BR of 6.0, the Ki-83. Its power plant includes two 18-cylinder radial engines. The space between the spars and the fuselage center is occupied by self-sealing fuel tanks. Fixed armament includes two 30mm and two 20mm cannons, with 160 and 320 rounds on each couple. The plane can also carry two 50-kilogram bombs. An interceptor's main task is to bring enemy aircraft down, so the Ki-83 is pretty capable at that. As all other aircraft of this class, it spawns mid-air, which means a good altitude advantage right off the start. Powerful engines coupled with a relatively small mass for a twin-engine plane provide a decent climb rate. Only a handful of its opponents can climb higher, which means most targets will be found either at the same altitude or below. The plane's weaponry is grouped in the front. 4 cannons can unleash a thick wave of rounds capable of destroying enemies more than a kilometer away. HE rounds are also efficient against any aerial target, be it a fighter or a strategic bomber. In a frontal attack, you might want to send short volleys from 2 to 2.5 kilometers away and then turn aside. The Ki-83 won't survive a lot of hits itself. The Japanese Interceptor has two more great qualities: a high flutter tolerance and good control at high speeds. The Ki-83 can exceed 800 kph in a nosedive, allowing it to catch and destroy even early jets. More than that, it stays predictable and responsive at that speed, so you shouldn't expect any issues in aiming. Maneuverability, however, leaves much to be desired. Even with an active use of flaps, this interceptor can't compete with single-engine fighters, which leaves a little chance for a victory in a long duel. So it makes perfect sense to limit your flying to boom and zoom, frontal attacks, and energy tactics. It's quick, simple, and most importantly, efficient. With such a modest choice of suspended armament, the Ki-83 can't play a significant role in mixed battles. Two 50-kilogram bombs won't make a big difference, and they aren't even conveniently placed for good close air support activities. If you do find yourself in such a situation, make full use of your fixed cannons and look for ground targets in the open. On the 6th of June, 1944, the largest seaborne landing in history began: D-Day. By that time, the Allies had already conquered the skies and held tight to their superiority. Thousands of bombers were slowly steamrolling German industry, almost completely destroying all synthetic fuel factories he'd had. The balance was obviously tipped to their side. Later, the head of the German tank industry, Gerd Stieler von Heidekampf, would admit in an interrogation that Normandy landings dispelled any hope the Germans had about victory, and made them feel skeptical towards any new programs. Still, the ground battles on the Western Front were tough. The main American tanks were Shermans with various types of guns. Their outdated 75mm cannons weren't always capable of penetrating the armor of the Jagdpanzer and Panzer IV. The Panther's frontal armor was good enough even against more powerful 76mm cannons. Throughout the whole war, right up until D-Day, the United States was leading in artillery quality among the Allies. But why did they have so much trouble with German armor during the Operation Overlord? Let's go back a little. At the beginning of the war, the American 37mm cannon was basically the best in its class. Its penetration rate was even better than that of the Soviet 45mm gun. The Sherman's armament was just as good and sometimes even better than the Soviet 76mm and 85mm cannons. In addition to gun and round quality, the Americans started adding stabilizers to tanks earlier than most. They had plenty of time for testing. So, at first, the race for armor thickness and caliber kept the American engineers busy. The first Sherman with a 76mm cannon entered the shooting range as early as August 1942. Meanwhile, Leningrad, on the other side of the planet, saw the Germans send their Tigers to the first real battle. By November the same year, the USA managed to push out the prototype M36 tank destroyer with a strong 90mm cannon. It seemed like they'd had enough before D-Day to sort out the small technical issues and establish a mass production, right? The German tanks would have stood no chance. But the army is notorious for wanting the engineers to pull off the impossible every time. Higher calibers, more armor, more speed. It was different that time around. The American military decided that 75 and 76mm guns would last the whole war, and the Germans wouldn't be able to produce enough Tigers and Panthers so fast. According to General Leslie McNair, tanks didn't need any 90mm guns. But the very first battles in Normandy proved it had been a mistake. Germany did succeed in mass-producing the Panthers that could destroy Shermans with a single hit, and the only gun that could do anything similar to them was the 90mm one. So the M36 tank destroyers were rushed to production. It was too late, though. Those guns would only see combat in autumn of 1944. That's how rushed decisions and underestimation can lead to losing an advantage that took so much sweat and blood to gain. We've recently talked about the specifics of playing heavy tanks. It's now time to talk about the worst enemy of all armored monsters, the HE machines. This fun class will be represented by 3 machines of different generations today: the Horo, the Brumbar, and the 2S3M Acacia. Let's first take a look at how they perform on an urban map, like the Normandy map. Early HE shell throwers are devastating machines capable of destroying anything that moves. But such power comes with great sacrifices. To be specific, mobility and armor. The tank destroyers like these are usually slow and only capable of surviving small caliber machine guns, which means you should always let heavier allies do the job of advancing the front lines. Not only that, the lack of a turret limits your multitasking game. And that means that your perfect positions on the Normandy map are the embankment and the second ring line. Still, you shouldn't forget about the long reload time. You won't be able to hit all the targets you'll see, so don't get greedy and let your allies move ahead. Even the medium tier has long reloads. Fortunately, some machines, including the Brumbar, finally have some armor. The armor allows them to push forward with few approaches and keep in the front. Unfortunately, it still has no turret. So much like in the previous generation, you should be looking at tunnel-like fighting places. There's a good new position for the Brumbar here, in addition to the second line and the embankment, a square around point B. Later machines have many more opportunities, thanks to a turret that can rotate. Tunnel tactics aren't the only option anymore, and you can quickly redirect your fire. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to one-shot any target you see with no aiming at such rank. Some enemy heavies can and will survive a large caliber HE shell, which means you might want to aim for the turret for an effective hit. Thankfully, later HE throwers have better muzzle velocity to make it easier, with a few exceptions, of course. And you still shouldn't rely on your armor, it's barely there to protect against bullets. Again, with a few exceptions. As for the rate of fire, some of the later machines are pretty slow. But there's also some monsters capable of throwing a new shell every 3 seconds. We believe the bar should be set around 14. If your reload time is shorter, you can fire effectively from pretty much any position. The embankment, central square, line 2 or 3. Just avoid enemy fire. Urban maps are the best for playing HE-wielding machines of any rank. But what do you do with them on an open map? Let's go to Sinai and see. Here, your main problem is poor ballistics. Hitting a moving target 500 meters away is a real challenge. So head to a place with shorter range fights and some cover for your reloads. On the Sinai map, it's line 7. Hills and rocks separate it from the rest of the map. The Brumbar feels a little more comfortable. It's capable of surviving some enemy fire and still pushing forward. But it has no turret, so its flanks are vulnerable, which means you still want to keep to tunnel like line 7. The Acacia gives players much more than that. With a good mobility and a proper turret, it can show a good performance on basically any area of the map. Even long-distance shots are viable thanks to the high muzzle velocity of its shells. Nevertheless, the final choice of optimal tactics for each particular case is up to you. Your experience will tell you where to put your grouchy Brumbar or plant your Acacia. Meanwhile, we'll answer some of the questions you ask us in the comments. The first question was sent by a player called Shadow Killer. How to effectively play the SU-100P? Hi, Shadow Killer. It's a pretty versatile machine capable of both long-distance and frontline combat. Arguably, its only limitations are depression angles and vulnerability to HE shells. Error name not found asks, what's the first tank that has a commander fire control? Hi, sorry, but the system throws an error where your name's supposed to be. Among tanks with commander fire control, the one with the lowest BR is the American M41 Walker Bulldog at 6.0. Another question comes from A-Squat. What is the difference between radar IRST locked for SPAA, and how do I switch between modes? Hi there. IRST is a passive sensor that can detect targets thanks to their infrared signature. Its advantage is that the enemy can't find out they're being locked onto. Demo Af writes, does torpedo cause damage to land vehicles? Yes, only if the torpedo hits water before hitting a land vehicle. Otherwise, its fuse won't trigger. And the last comment for today was written by Leonardo DK. Some tanks can shoot without the gunner. That explains a lot. Hello, Leonardo. Yes, that's exactly how it works in real life. By the way, if you want to know where a tank has commander fire control, just go to X-ray mode and point your cursor at them. Once again, that's it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, and the next episode will premiere the following Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT or noon Eastern Time. Subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss our next videos. Should I repeat myself? Yes. Why? because you don't want to miss the next videos. Hey, and don't forget to paint your tank red for that extra speed. Leave a like, share your thoughts and comments, and we'll see you next week.